everyone, and welcome to episode 11 of Marking the Role, a podcast for teachers. And while we're based in the Illawarra region of New South Wales in Australia, this podcast is for teachers everywhere. If you want more information about Marking the Role, just go to Marking the Role, and that is ROLE, markingtherole.com.au. There you will find all of the past episodes, or of course you can get them wherever you get your podcasts. We're a volunteer organisation. No one is paid here to do the job. We simply believe that teachers need a voice, and there are issues that need to be discussed in the education system that haven't been discussed openly in the past. My name is 𝗙𝗲𝗽𝗃. I'm your host. I'm an ex-teacher, a musician, an ex-journalist, and I have an avid interest in what's happening in our schools and universities. And if you wanted to support Marking the Role, there is a button on the website, markingtherole.com.au, where you can buy us a coffee, which is really a metaphorical cup of coffee for $5. You can become a member, and there's certain lurks and perks for membership. Last week our topic was on educational technology, and for the first part of that episode I spoke to 𝗦𝘂𝗽𝗃𝗁 from 𝗙𝗃𝗁𝗃𝗃𝗁, and we talked about the different platforms that exist, about the privacy issues that exist in educational technologies. For example, who gets the data? We found out that some teachers are avoiding educational technology, and it's usually the teachers who have been in the service for a long time. They're used to doing things in a certain way, and they're resisting the educational technology, whereas younger teachers are taking it up. There was a tip from Michael that if you're going to go down the educational technology path and have EdTech help teach subjects, in whether you're in a secondary school or primary school, whether it's maths, whether it's English, whether it's science. If you're going to go down that path, it's best to get an organisation or a company that are good communicators, that have customer service for you virtually at any time of the day, where the company actually has a phone number that you can call. Teachers are communicators, and it's important to be able to phone them up, not just use a pro forma on a website, where the content can be adjusted for your students, and where there is levels within levels, because as we know, there is not just one mainstream class anymore. There are many, many different levels of student within that class. So that was a good tip from 𝗦𝘂𝗃𝗁𝗃 from 𝗙𝗃𝗁𝗃𝗃𝗁. I then spoke to 𝗵𝗿𝗃𝗃𝗁 from 𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗃. Now, what Ian had to say fascinated me, and it fascinated many, it seems. 𝗏𝗏𝗃𝗃 is a well-being app that students use. The aim of that app is to get them to check in with their well-being. If they're being bullied at school, or if something's not going right, they can go into their app, and they can work on their own plan as to how to overcome that issue. And the whole idea, according to Ian, was that it makes the students take responsibility for their well-being. Now, we did discuss issues of privacy and data, who actually gets to look at that information that's entered into the app by the student. And it's the school that can look at that in order to try and help a student through a particular issue. There is no obligation for the school to relate those concerns to the parents. And the students, if they need to, can go on and talk to a psychologist. So it really was going to another level of student well-being that actually made them responsible and could create some privacy and legal issues, especially if parents weren't informed of a particular crisis that was going on in the student's life. And I referred to the case in America where the Year 8 boy, the 14-year-old boy, was socially transitioning from male to female. The school knew all about it and was counselling that boy, yet the parents did not know about it for 6 months. So this is the sort of issue that app raised. So it was an interesting episode. Today, our topic is on casual teaching and temporary teaching and the casualisation of the teaching workforce. And it's here I have to apologise to our listeners because I put a call out that listeners could actually record their comments about being casual and being temporary, and that we would include them in the podcast. And I tested the link on our website and it was all fine, but I didn't test it on a mobile and nothing worked. There was lots of visitors to that site where they could, where listeners could leave their comment, but unfortunately it didn't work. So I do apologise to you. Therefore, I don't have the listener comments about being casual and permanent. Again, my apologies. This topic came about because we received messages from teachers who were very concerned that they weren't being made permanent. They were being kept in a sort of a limbo by having temporary contracts. Some were even on the casual list and wanted to be permanent and couldn't see any future for them unless they were permanent. So I decided to get a national viewpoint and I spoke to Dr. Alexis Vassiley. He's a research associate in the Centre for Work and Wellbeing in the Faculty of Business and Law at Edith Cowan University. Alexis, why have we seen such a rise in casualisation?
Well, what we've seen is there's a huge amount of people in the Australian workforce in insecure work, so on casual contracts, fixed-term contracts and other forms, and it actually makes up between 1 in 4 and 1 in 5 workers. For the employer, it's really got a number of advantages, and there's a lot more flexibility for the employer, and indeed a lot of cost savings. So I think that's why it's become such a big issue.
So the employers prefer it because of some issues, and cost saving is one. How do they save costs by employing casuals?
On average, casual workers earn less, and they actually on average earn less per hour, as well as they will earn less as a result of not working full-time hours often, even though they want to.
For teachers, Alexis, the teachers don't work just 2 hours and someone sends them home. They're doing exactly the same hours as a permanent teacher. So if you're a casual teacher, you'll do the same hours in front of the class. You don't do the administrative work, the marking and the meetings. So is the cost saving in holiday pay and sick pay, is that where the most of the cost saving lies?
Some colleagues have done a lot of work in this, particularly in New South Wales, but also in WA. What their researchers have shown is that in New South Wales it's around 10% of teachers are casuals, and the use of casuals has gone up. But really, arguably the bigger problem is the use of short-term contracts, and that there's around 15% now of teachers on short-term fixed-term contracts of 3 years or less.
So it's 15% on the temporary short-term contracts, plus another 10% of casuals. Is that right? So it's about a total of 25%.
That's right. You do see different issues between casuals and fixed-term contracts, and it does vary by industry. But in neither case is there job security. they're not permanently employed. In terms of casuals, there's no there's not leave entitlement, sick leave, annual leave, long service leave, and so forth. What the research has shown with particularly the fixed teachers on fixed term contracts, and this is the same in other industries, particularly professional industries, is that those employees desire to be permanent. They desire to have an ongoing contract and to really make a start in their career in that industry, be it teaching or otherwise. And so they're not wanting to be on the fixed term contracts, and so it means that they can be less likely to speak up, they'll work harder, they're always trying to impress, and they need to do that. Because otherwise there's the risk that at the end of the 6 months, at the end of the 12 months, however long the contract is, they won't be re-employed.
Has there been a rise in temporary and casualisation during COVID? Because, I just heard today that there's 20,000 Australians per day being diagnosed with COVID. That means sick leave. If they've got long COVID, it can mean a very long period of sick leave. Does the casualisation suit the employers more because they don't have to pay that during COVID?
Look, I think that's a good point. See, what I think we saw with COVID actually is some of these underlying issues in employment relations really come to the surface. I'm not sure if you remember fairly early on in the pandemic, there was the issue with security guards in the quarantine hotels actually spreading COVID, and they were casuals working multiple jobs. Similar thing in aged care, people work in multiple aged care facilities, and they're doing that because they want more hours. They've got low pay. And that was actually spreading the virus. So, what was an issue for those workers really became an issue for broader society and really became an issue in the media and in public debate. So, I think it's really brought this issue to the surface. Another interesting thing that we're seeing is, some employers are paying COVID leave to casuals, others aren't. So, the ones that aren't are obviously saving. The ones that are, in a sense, it's a tacit acknowledgement that the casual loading payment, which is often around 25% extra, you get as a casual to the hourly rate, that casual loading actually isn't enough. It doesn't compensate for you're not having your annual leave, your sick leave, your long service leave, and in some cases not getting the hours that you want.
Look, teaching, because we have such a shortage of teachers in this country and actually worldwide, there's a shortage of teachers that the casuals are in demand. And I'm not sure what research has been done about this, but during COVID, when teachers worked from home and did the online stuff, and other industries also, was there a feeling that people thought, oh, look, I ideally don't want to be a spoke in the industry wheel anymore. I don't want to be doing my 40 to 60 to 80 hours a week. I just want to be a casual. Do you think there's been a shift in the perception of the Australian workers?
It's very hard to generalise. I mean, what we did see, though, I think, was, a huge burden placed on people, really all workers. The whole, working from home and, preparing lessons and transitioning to online. I mean, that was, I think necessary for the health, for health reasons, but there often, wasn't an accompanying increase in resources to prepare those lessons to change. I mean, let's face it, it's very different. I know myself teaching in a university setting. It's very different teaching online from in person. It's not the same thing. I mean, it's not ideal to just plonk the same lessons that you would have done in person online.
No, it's a whole different skill, isn't it? Alexis, what is the future looking like for permanent work and for casual work. Can you see in the next 10 or 15 years, is casuals going to increase, do you think, as technology takes over more of a full-time teacher's job, for example?
What we've often seen with technology has been predictions of huge displacement of workers, but the reality has been that new jobs, new roles have been created, and or the existing roles are changed. So it's more that technology, works alongside human workers. In terms of insecure work, I don't see it getting any better in the absence of a real desire by either governments to change it or by employees and their representatives, by unions to put pressure on employers to increase the number of permanent staff. And the reason for that is that employers gain such a benefit out of having people in insecure work, and unfortunately for the workers involved, there's real issues of justice, and there's also health issues that go along with that. In Victoria, there's currently a trial of sick leave for casuals that the government's actually paying workers in a small number of industries for a 2-year trial, that they're paying them, I think it's 5 days sick leave for a year. So, that'll be welcomed, you'd imagine, by those workers that weren't previously enjoying it.
It sounds rather shadowy when you said that the advantages for employers of keeping the workers insecure. Is that what's happened historically? Is there examples of that?
Casual employment's really old. I mean, you go back to the early 1900s, and wharfies were picked, by a sort of foreman for a day's work, and the biggest and strongest got the day's work, and everyone else went home. That used to be called the bull system, and that was eventually abolished through union action. But again, we're seeing a similar thing today. There's some a lot of people on the wharf are casuals, and they get their shifts by a text message the night before, or I think in some cases even the morning of the day.
Yes, and as teachers do as well, they get their message to turn up at a school at the night before via text, if they're a casual teacher. So yeah, that's interesting.
What I have heard is that the fixed term contracts are a bigger issue, and interestingly, what had happened there, at least in New South Wales, was that the teachers' union around 20 years ago actually suggested bringing in a category of fixed-term workers with the hope of moving casuals onto fixed-term contracts, so that what happened was that rather than moving the casuals onto the fixed-term contracts, we've seen the proportion of people in permanent employment in teaching New South Wales decline. So the casuals were sort of remaining constant, and there was a lower proportion of people on permanent contracts. And now there's around 15% of teachers on fixed-term contracts. There can be the stress of, the contract comes up for renewal, will it be renewed? And that can go on for year after year. Can be many years, as I understand it in teaching as well, and certainly other industries. There are actually health impacts of job insecurity, and so the West Australian government has issued a code of practice on psychosocial workplace hazards. So psychosocial hazard is anything in the design, organisation or management of work that causes stress. And so they actually said, well, job insecurity is a hazard that can cause stress. We can see a link between casual work and ill health. So, casual and temporary work, there's higher injury rates, worse injuries in some industries, high risk of heart disease, even things like more unwanted sexual advances at work, and higher levels of anxiety and depression. So, we can see, I guess, the link between the conditions of work and the job insecurity and what actually impacts people's health.
And Alexis, what about the big issue of workload? It's a major concern for teachers at the moment.
Phil, workload we see as a huge issue in a lot of industries and including for teachers. And what we hear is teachers saying that they've got a lot of administrative duties and not the time to do that. So really calling for a lot more time to be able to do their duties. I wouldn't want to be a teacher, put it that way.
And gee, I'm glad my days in the classroom are over as well. That was Dr. Alexis Vassiley, Research Associate in the Centre for Work and Wellbeing in the Faculty of Business and Law at Edith Cowan University in Western Australia. Now it's time for a brain break. For those of you who aren't regular listeners of Marking the Role, a brain break is where you get a chance to listen to some music, lower the electrical state of your brain, and come back refreshed for the second part of the podcast, where we'll be hearing from someone who has a pretty thorough knowledge of the casual teaching industry. Our brain break today is from Cherry MaMalade, a band from the Illawarra, and their song is called Patagonia.
Follow the stars shining bright, travel the continent away you like. This is where you need to hide. Cold as hell, you can tell, a rough terrain on the outer shell. This is where you will be well. Oh, Patagonia, yeah, Patagonia. Patagonia. Magic lake, shining blue, on a castle in Peru. It is all you want to do. Yeah, track your way to the fair, wearing thermal underwear. Speak the language, I don't care. Oh, Patagonia. Yeah, Patagonia. 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 Glaciers to be seen, 𝗵𝗄𝗏𝗃𝗁𝗄𝗃, all the way to Argentina, on to South America. If you haven't been, you need to go ski and trek across the snow, see the stars put on a show. Yeah, calm your palm, chew your grip, let it take over your will. You might even see Brazil. Oh, Patagonia. Yeah, Patagonia. 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 Patagonia.
And that was band from the Illawarra Cherry Marmalade with the song Patagonia, and you can hear them wherever you get your music. They're on Spotify and all of those platforms.
You're listening to Marking the Role, a podcast for teachers and anyone interested in education. You can keep the podcast going by becoming a member or making a small donation through 𝗙𝗶𝘃𝗃. Just go to markingtherole.com.au and click on the yellow coffee cup. Thanks for listening.
Now, we've heard from Dr. Alexis Vassiley that being casual and being on temporary contracts is actually a form of control, really, of the employee by the employer. We're now going to have a talk to someone who knows the casual teaching industry, if you could call it that, pretty well backwards. As you would know, schools are struggling to find casual teachers. Classes are being split and ending up sitting in a playground sometimes, as there are no teachers to take that class. So to find out the state of the casual teaching service, I spoke to Gary Keet. Gary is the director of a casual teaching agency called Your Teaching Agency, based in Victoria. Gary, I wanted to talk to you about the rise in casual teaching, but first, can you just talk about what you do and how you got into running a casual teaching agency?
Yeah, so we supply primary and secondary schools with casual relief teachers. Sometimes it's day to day, and sometimes it's for a little bit longer to replace teachers that might be away on long service leave or other things, sick for a long term. So most of our work would range from a one-day placement through to maybe a 4-week stint, depending on how long the teacher's going to be away for. We started back in 2017. I was teaching in schools and secondary schools and wanted a bit of a break from that, and the opportunity came up, so I thought I would give it a go. We started back then, and we just started very small with one school and a couple of teachers, and just built it up from there. And it's been going really well. The demand is very high in Victoria at the moment, especially.
And how many teachers do you have in your books, Gary?
Yeah, we wish we had more, obviously. Pre-COVID, we had about 150 teachers on our books. But unfortunately now with everything's happened, for a lot of different reasons, we're down to about 80 teachers on our books.
What's happening in New South Wales, Victoria and all over Australia is happening all over the world, Gary. There's a casualisation of the education workforce. Do you see this as increasing, that the number of permanent teaching roles will be decreasing, or will there be a change, do you think?
I wish I knew. I really do, because then I could plan my business accordingly. But I think it's definitely becoming more popular with teachers to be casual relief teachers because of the demands that are imposed on full-time teachers at the moment. Whether that scales back over the next few years, I don't know. I can't say that it will. But there's definitely a lot more teachers saying to me, well, we don't want to work full-time anymore because the demands are just way too high, and we could be a bit more flexible. A lot of those teachers have been teaching for 20 plus years and don't need to work full-time anymore financially. So they say, well, 4 days a week suits them really well. They can pick the days they have on and off. And yeah, they love it. So I think it will become more popular. And I think the days of schools managing themselves is almost up. Agencies do a very good job what they do, and teachers as well. They don't want 15 schools ringing them in the morning all asking them to work. They just want to know where they're going each day, and that suits them as well. So, yeah, I can say that's going to become more popular.
And what are the advantages of being a casual teacher, do you think, over being a permanent teacher?
Oh, there's a lot. They don't have to put up with any pressures that come with working full-time, like marking, meetings, which is a lot of, reports, curriculum planning, documentation. That's really come a long way with the documentation that you need to do now. It's not just a matter of putting a lesson plan together anymore. Everything has to be done in teams and all together.
Yes.
Going home working for 2 or 3 hours every night after you get home as well That's a big one. A lot of teachers are saying to me that since they've been doing casual relief teachers, they've got their nights back again, and their weekends back again. They can do other things. Parent-teacher interviews is not that difficult, but they do come around in your busiest time. So yeah, they're the main things that are getting feedback from teachers saying that's why they're a casual relief teacher.
In New South Wales, and I guess it's the same in Victoria, it's the amount of administrative work that teachers have to do if they're permanent.
Yeah.
So it doesn't show any signs of decreasing. So teachers are leaving the workforce, permanent workforce, in droves, and they're going on to the casual list, which is really adding to the casualisation. One of the big issues has been that casuals haven't been able to get a home loan or a personal loan. Have you found that in Victoria?
I haven't had that feedback from any teachers, no.
It's funny because I did some research this morning and found that banks are all too willing to give casual teachers a loan. They have to actually jump through a couple more hoops than a permanent staff member.
Yeah.
But I think there is a myth out there that casuals and temporary teachers can't get home loans. And
I give teachers letters along those lines all the time, just saying, well, you're a casual teacher for banks. Addressed to the banks saying, well, casual teacher, but this is how much they've worked in the last year, 2 years, how many days per week roughly on average, and then what's expected in the future, and they accept that.
And do you see being a casual teacher as a good introduction to teachers who are fairly new out of their teaching course?
Oh, absolutely. We deal with a lot of graduate teachers, and the sad thing is a lot of them say, well, I'm only going to be doing casual teaching until I can get a full-time job. And they don't consider casual teaching. They're all going for that full-time job straight out of university, which I don't think, my experience is not a great option unless you're, really ready for it. But a lot of casual teachers aren't ready for it straight out of university. So they start off on everything we've just spoken about, the marking, the meetings, reports, curriculum, work after school and all that. They're not just doing that. They're also getting ready for becoming full-time teachers and as part of the VIT process here. Their workload is huge to try and become fully registered because they're only provisionally registered in Victoria the first few years out of university. So they're adding all that on top of it as well. Plus they're trying to get used to teaching in the classroom management skills, which they don't have because it's impossible for the unis to prepare them for what's going to come when they leave uni and go out to work at a school. Doing teaching rounds is great and it gives them a bit of an introduction, but having your own class is very different. And managing that class yourself is very different. So the pressures that they have on them when they come out of university and start teaching full-time are huge, way more than a normal teacher would have. And they don't have the experience to be able to handle it. So the feedback from the teachers that do that for a year or two first is, I'm so glad that I did that because it really set up my career.
And they can also make a decision, I suppose, Gary, as to whether they even want to be a permanent teacher after seeing the suffering of their colleagues.
Yeah, it could just be also the difference between a Catholic school, an independent school and a government school. Well, they can make the choice as to which direction they go in as well. The teachers that I have that come through me and they work at some of these schools and they get jobs at those schools, they last a lot longer at that school because they know what they're walking into. And they might say, well, yeah, I love working at this school, but I don't like working at that school. So when a job comes up at the school they don't love, they won't know that coming straight out of uni whether they're going to like the school or not. So this way they've had the chance to go to the school, see what it's like working there, see what it's like the staff, the culture of the school, and then decide whether they want to take a position there.
What would you suggest to a casual teacher that's going out, that is fairly new, fairly fresh out of university, when they first go into a staff room? What do you think a casual teacher should do? Oh,
well, a staff room, the first thing to do is just get to know everyone in the staff room and talk to as many people as they can. So
not hide away in the class, but go in and be social.
No. Straight into the staff room first day and start talking to people. Talk to other casual relief teachers that are there as well. They'll be their biggest support.
Just finally, Gary, when a student comes out of university and they're go into the casual workforce, now there's plenty of these agencies around in New South Wales. I know I used to work through one. What should that teacher look for in an agency? Because they're not all the same, are they?
They're definitely not all the same. We're very different to the other agencies around in Victoria. We've got 3 or 4 really big agencies, and then we have probably about 20 agencies about the same size as us. Look, it depends what you want and where you are. Some teachers just want to come straight out of university and say, I want the biggest agency because I want to work every day and I don't care where I work, and that's fine. They go to those agencies. But the teachers that want a little bit more one-on-one with the agency, definitely a smaller agency is the way to go.
So the smaller the agency, the more they get to know the teachers, and therefore they link or match the teachers with the schools. For example, if the teacher has a musical skill or a language skill, you can match that with the casual teacher.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And that's what we do for our schools, and that's a service we can provide for our schools that the other agencies, the bigger ones, can't.
Thanks very much for talking to us. That was 𝗏𝗃𝗃𝗃 from Your Teaching Agency, located in Victoria. So for you teachers out there who are permanent, and I know that you have a really hard road, according to Gary, a lot of permanent teachers are now opting to go casual. Yes, this means resigning from the permanent teaching service and taking casual positions as they come up. There seems to be no shortage of work for casuals. Now, that won't suit everyone, but for those who are raising a young family, I found it terrific. There's opportunity to work 3 or 4 days a week, don't have to work 5 days. You can have time for the kids, and there's no admin stress, there's very little marking, and hardly any meetings. Next week, we'll be looking at the Year 12 exam. Is it really worth persisting with this old form of evaluation where there are so many better forms of evaluation, and when there's only 40% of university entrants are based on the ATAR? So that'll be next week in Marking the Role. It's been good to have you listening, and I'll see you next week.